Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Jared Seigler. Just wanting to get on today, and I'll let, of course, Dr. Traster talk about it more. I've been doing functional medicine for 14 years. I've been a chiropractor for 14 years, and I actually spent like a decade of my life, like I'm going to work with athletes, 40 times with pads on, like all that stuff. But then my wife was told she would never get pregnant, and I didn't buy that. So I dove into functional medicine. I have two beautiful kids. Her brother with Crohn's is like off his meds and all that. And then I thought to myself, like, I kind of don't care about back pain and 40 times with like pads on. Like, I want to do this. And then it spurred further, because it's the patients that we can't get better initially, right? Like if I love you hear it too. Like people are like, wow, I'm feeling so much better, thanks. And I'm like, I didn't really learn anything. I applied what I knew. I'm glad it worked out. Awesome. But when you're like scratching your head, like, what the heck is like, why are they not getting better? What? Then you really got to learn. And that's where I feel as a clinician. So I talked with this mom, and she's like, my son's never talked, and he was 9. And I was like, I've never worked with autism before, like full transparency, but I believe the body can heal if you position it. So I say, hey, I see the body heal. Let's just rely on him instead of me. And like 6 months later, she sent me a video of him with echolalia. And then I really got into the brain and the neuro stuff. I was like, wow, that was like the biggest dopamine surge I've ever got in my life. And I was like, I want to do this, like my nucleus accumbens was like, this is good. So anyways, and personally got affected by mold, me and my family. And then I learned once I really saw it for myself, I realized how much I was missing it in practice. And because, I always go back to patients, even maybe a couple years ago, and I look back and think, those poor souls, like, what was I doing to them? Because, I'm always trying to evolve and learn as a clinician. I feel that's extremely important for us to do.
Let me ask you this, because you mentioned you got exposed to mold or you got impacted by mold. I think,
Hmm.
and we'll talk a lot about mold this episode, obviously, but why don't you start, if you're open to it,
Yeah.
talking about what happened to you, how you felt, what were your symptoms? Because I think a lot
Yeah.
of people might have been exposed to mold in the past and be sick, but they might not even realize,
Yeah.
that they might not be living in a moldy place right now, but they might have been exposed a year ago.
Yeah. The big thing for me, trouble sleeping. I've always been able to sleep. Like even arguing with girlfriend in high school or whatever, just fall asleep. Fine. Like it didn't bother me ever. But then I realized like, man, I'm just laying here. And then I heard my daughter start coughing, just random stuff like that. Um, and for me, it was a lot of basal ganglionic issues, trouble with inhibition, like a big trouble with inhibition. I realized I was like swearing. I was like kind of like my amygdala would get ramped up a little more. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And my memory was going kaput. I'm like one of those left brain dorks, like just remember so much, right? But then I'm thinking like I had that door jam disease. I'd like pick up my phone and be like, who the heck was I? Like, what was I doing right now? Like, I really felt like, is this what Alzheimer's is going to be like? Because I watched my grandma go down that road. Um, but then the big wake up call, because I just thought, like, because we were waiting for our house to be built, so it was in an apartment, and like, so the air conditioner would turn on, and I could hear it. So I was like, okay, maybe it's the sound. But then I got a sore throat, and I thought it was a sore throat. But finally, after a couple days, I'm like, this is not a sore throat. So I finally go to the ER, and it's an abscess that was almost retropharyngeal. Yeah. It was, yeah, they were like, take some antibiotics. So I called Brock, and he's like, dude, take the antibiotics. And sure enough, I did. Um, and started to feel better. So we found out it was one called Stachybotrys. So we just left everything, nothing in that apartment ever got into our house. Because I just tell some patients, like some of those mold toxins, your house could burn down and it would just be a moldy pile of ash. Like you can't get rid of some of this stuff. So I viewed that as I was fortunate. I could just turn and walk away. Um, but then my wife's brain fog, she's like a canary in the mine. Like now that she's been exposed, we'll just like get to a hotel room and she'll just kind of wait and take a few breaths. And if she's like, oh, my nose is itching, I'm getting all foggy and anxious, then we're like, oh, gotta go. But then looking back, even before that, clinically, I knew mold was an issue, but it didn't really dawn on me how much until I saw a patient, nonverbal, and she was having like many seizures a day. And she goes to the US, flies for an intensive for 2 weeks. Excellent progress. No more seizures, starts becoming verbal, like back to like context is good. Enunciation, like 5, 6 word sentences. We're like, wow, that's really, really good, worth the money. She goes back and it's like it never happened. Starts seizing up again, completely nonverbal. And I was like telling him, I was like, run that ERMI, right? Um, so they ran it, and sure enough, they found it, and we ran some pee, and then now that I know what to look for, I start hearing things because I just tell patients like mold is really just going to excite the nervous system and excite the immune system. Where I've had patients say things like, "Is it weird my daughter only has seizures when they go to the library at school on a trip?" And I'm like, "No, not at all. Like never go in there again." Um, but then, to me, and that's actually something I find back to the loss of sleep. Like, I didn't just start with Parkinson's. I've watched my great grandfather die of that. So that's definitely on my mind. Um, but I would say, man, it was just that lack of sleep. Like, and now I would assume it was like all the glutamate and all these other things just kind of coursing through my veins. But then when people are telling me, like, oh, yeah, I just have trouble sleeping or I'm an insomniac, but to me, the biggest thing, they can't smell.
Interesting.
Because I mean, how does neurodegeneration start? We know it's not a tremor and forgetting your kids or something like the peanut butter smell test, right? I know you've read about it from Harvard. We'll do that all the time. When like the peanut butter's like right here under their nose, and they're like, there it is, and we're like, wow. And even Parkinson's, that what do they usually say? I'm constipated, I have a frozen shoulder, and I can't smell, man. I can't smell anything. And now I'm just like ding, ding, ding. So anyways, now, but for neuro, because obviously I like working with kids too, right? So to me, autism, nothing against an old person, but if a 78-year-old is like, hey, I can eat peas, drink water with I'm like, that's cool, man. That's great. It is great. I don't want to dismiss that because that is that quality of life. But I would much rather have a 5-year-old talk and make friends and get invited to parties. Like to me, I'm like, man, we're really like trying to make a difference, right? But then I realized, like, a lot of these kids, they can't even feel their faces with their like neural dysregulation. I'm like, they're not even sneezing. Like, all this weird stuff is happening to them, and they can't even respond to it, which to me starts to get even crazier.
Let me ask you this. So let's jump right ahead before I bring it back.
Yeah,
Let's
sorry.
talk autism, right? Because you bring up autism. And obviously there's different views on autism, right? And especially if you look online, and
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
when you look online, we know autism is a brain disorder.
Hmm.
We know autism happens early on in life. We know the majority of autism is environmental, right?
Hmm.
And it changes the way that the brain connects. And I guess we know there's a lot of movement of people doing vitamins, doing minerals, doing parasite cleanse, doing mold cleanse, and just kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
doing everything they can to reduce inflammation in their gut, in their body, any triggers. My question to you is, do you think these autistic kids are being exposed to mold, or do you think that they've got dysregulation of how their brain and immune system are running and are properly acting so they're more
Yeah.
exposed? Because there's mold everywhere. I live in Florida.
Yeah.
You're going to get
So
exposed to
it's
mold one way or
like in
another,
every duct that you walk into.
right?
Yeah. So
But not everyone is sick, right? So do you think
yeah.
it's a predisposition that you're going to have to address at some point? Do you think, where do you think, why do you think you're saying
Yeah.
autism is an infection?
I think there's totally a genetic component because I've had some parents, like the whole family is being exposed to mold if it's in the house, right? And
Mhm.
I say, Dad and the son are falling apart, barely keeping a job, failing out of second grade. Like, what the heck? And mom's like, basement's a little moldy. Yeah, it smells musty. And I'm like, look at the genetics.
Mhm.
So to me, kind of circling or starting at the beginning, to me, autism is autoimmune until proven otherwise. Because when we start to really look at it, I don't want to say always, because I never believe in 100%, right? As soon as somebody says 100 or zero, I'm like, bias. But I would say the vast majority of kids I work with on the spectrum, we find an immune trigger. And it might seem not important at the time, like mom got sick, we know maternal immune activation. I'm not even going to bring up the V word, but I'd say heavy metal exposure, stuff like that. Definitely mold exposure, getting them sick. So whenever we look at that, then we know there's those HLA genes, right? So then I say, wow, if we start looking at a lot of these HLA genes for all the people that get into the weeds and they're running all these genetic tests, I'm like, we're looking at basically gluten sensitivity, autoimmunity, mold sensitivity. It's just, are you going to get MS, RA, or Parkinson's? Like, kind of genetically, where's it going to shake out for you type deal? But I like to be a very basic guy. To me, I say the solution is still the same for someone genetically susceptible. Cut out the bread, especially in North America. Get rid of these infectious triggers and definitely get rid of mold. And then if you kind of have all those things covered, your immune system, in my opinion, should be able to do things pretty well. I have autoimmunity. My wife has autoimmunity. So again, those are things that are like kind of on the frontier. But then we just look at the patient's history. I got to meet Dr. Carol Lovett, so I know you know who that is.
Mhm.
Old, smart nerd, super nerd. And I remember him saying one time, your patients will tell you what's wrong with them. You just have to be smart enough to listen. And I was like, got it. Okay. And he always said soft hands, that was kind of his thing. Um, anyway, so I believe in the power of observation because if a mom tells me, wow, my son, his autism almost went away in the summer, but then we go back to school and the echolalia starts and he lost eye contact again. I'm like, now we're looking at an environmental thing. Yeah, there might be stress from school, but I mean, come on, right? Like,
Let me ask you this, because I always
yeah,
explain to people where I say, you might not realize this, but the brain, the immune system, we don't know a lot about. But what we
yeah.
do know about is it starts with about 300 cells in a neural plate, and
Hmm.
then it grows into about 80 or 90 billion brain cells and like 80 or 90 billion immune cells.
Yeah.
And at
And
the end of
hopefully they stay post-mitotic, right?
the
Like,
hopefully, but at the end of the day, the immune system
yeah.
is what grows the brain. It's what prunes the brain. It's what
Yeah.
deals with the connections. And so it's actually your immune system that sets the stage for brain development. And if
Yeah.
the immune system gets altered, brain development can be altered. So my question to you is because we know there's critical periods and we know
Hmm.
there's, first year in life, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, are
Yeah.
you finding differences treating environmental factors at different ages? Like if you get them younger, do you find
Oh,
differences versus older? Or are you finding similar outcomes? Or how does
yeah.
that work? Because obviously, an 8-year-old, or I got a 25-year-old now on the spectrum, and he's a
Hmm.
high functioning 25-year-old, but would I do something different if he was one, etc.?
Yeah. I would have to say totally, because as you know, there starts to be like C1 through 5 of the hippocampus, right? Um, so what I find is if mom is exposed to mold and that baby's exposed to it in utero, man, that is tough. Like, that is tough because their immune system cells are so primed. So, definition of primed, I say it's like we know it, especially in functional neurology, is like a double tap for head injuries, right? Like, boom, like that Tua guy. He got hit light on Sunday. On Thursday, he's all like decorticate. I'm like, whoa. So we're like, that was a prime because then those immune cells, they can't use a stick, like a little firecracker. They can only use a stick of dynamite now. And sometimes they never go back. As we know, once they're polarized or once they're kind of on high alert, like I've had head injuries. So I just tell people, like, it's not worth it for me to do all this bouncing around stuff. Like, I can feel it, like, and I'm good. Um, but so we know that the immune system is very important. And I find a lot of kind of similarities between autism and Alzheimer's. A lot, right? Oh, they're getting baby-like because we know these primitive reflexes are coming back and they're reemerging. And so we see kind of that brain. But I say with an adult, they already have the branches. So as if there's demyelination, it's just naked branches. But we know as the brain is developing and these dendrites and everything's are trying to grow, if they're demyelinated before they grow, what do? They just shrink back, right? So, anyways, back to that. The kids I've seen super hypothalamic issues and major basal ganglionic issues. Like they come out of the womb just like restless leg already. Um, because well we know those parts of the brain are super susceptible, so kind of for everyone listening, just to keep it simple, back to the immune system, the same part of the immune system, Th1 and Th17, that fight bacteria and molds in the nose, exact same immune system for neurological autoimmunity. So we know they can go up that olfactory bulb through kind of that cheese grater that we call the cribriform plate and say then they just walk back. They go either back into the temporal lobe and they start messing with that hippocampus and hypothalamus, and now we have all these sleep-wake cycles, memory issues, Alzheimer's, or they go into the substantia nigra and the basal ganglia. And now we have these kind of either Parkinsonian, mainly in kids I see like they would call it pandas or pans, or they're like, wow, they have all these outbursts and emotional dysregulations and tics. And I'm like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, but it's just so much harder because their body developed that way. You know, it's kind of like a kid raised in war. They're used to like gunfire at night. So when it's quiet, they're still like PTSD'd out, right? So the same thing I find for their immune system. So that's where you look for amelioration of symptoms, but I just say you can't really ever turn and walk away sometimes, you know, like they have to stay gluten free. Like if a kid in their class gets a cold, like they probably have to sprint the other direction, you know, because they're just so much more susceptible to it now.
Let me ask you this. Some people might not realize this. The number one reason people go to the medical neurologist is a migraine. The
Go,
number two reason right now, and the number two diagnosis of the medical neurologist, medically reason to go to neurologist is a functional neurologic disorder.
really?
Number two reason is an FND, which classically is like a movement disorder where people move too much, but there are other FNDs. And
Yeah.
what I find is I see so many FNDs now because there's no one that's really helping them. You know, they go to
Hmm.
psychologists, and there's a theory that if you have a functional neurologic disorder, that you might have had like a trigger, an emotional trigger in the past. And for some people, that's
Yeah.
true, but it's to the point where that's what they assume. So it's like, well, maybe it was when you were 2 months old, right? And that
Yeah.
could be true, but like they're trying to find an emotional trigger that makes you susceptible. My opinion is for most of my FNDs, they're either misdiagnosed and they've had a history of
Hmm.
concussions or something else. There's wrong. This is wrong diagnosis.
Yeah.
Or I find they're very immune regulated. And a lot of people's FNDs and movement disorders are coming from the immune system. And
Yeah.
what I find, especially since COVID, and maybe it's just because COVID did something to the immune system we could talk about, or
Oh.
maybe I'm just a little smarter. You know, either way,
Yeah.
I've known about mold for a while because my background
Yeah.
is Lyme, so I'm not ignorant to mold. But since COVID, I'm finding a lot of mold in a lot of patients, whether it's primary
Hmm.
or secondary. And I'm finding a lot of these movement disorders do have high levels of mold. I also
Yeah.
find the medical community wants nothing to do with it to the point where I have patients who have
Yeah.
multi-million dollar lawsuits happening that
Oh,
they're
wow.
probably going to win, not just for mold, but toxic gases, sewage pipes
Mhm.
opening, like crazy things.
Yeah.
And the doctors then will say, oh, that makes sense, but they want nothing to do with it. So I guess
Yeah.
my question first, before we go deeper, is can you explain how mold can impact the immune system and how the immune
Yeah.
system can impact the brain?
Yeah, for sure. So back to that Th1, Th17, we'll see the immune system start secreting some of these inflammatory cytokines, like tumor necrosing factor alpha as being one of the primaries, interleukin 1 beta, and interleukin 6. But we all know those are like these very ancient, like on switches for the immune system. Like, hey, let's just start wrecking it. This stuff is not Dr. Traster, so we'll just start killing it. Um, but then it gets really shaken down by like, well, what specific mold toxin are we talking about? Is somebody maybe getting like mycophenolic acid, which is so immune suppressing? I tell my patients when I find it, I'm like, well, no wonder we're finding all these viruses and parasites and candida and clostridia. I'm like, you're basically taking Cellcept every day. And I was like, and they give that to organ transplant patients and lupus patients. I was like, that's how strong it shuts off Th2. Or we have gliotoxin, which that'll punch through the blood-brain barrier super easily through the nose, everywhere in the blood. But then that also cuts off T and B cells. So now we can't make antibodies, and now we can't make like these effectors, CD4, CD8 cells to start actually killing what the antibodies tag. So I say part of the immune system, we typically see a lopsidedness. Like usually we'll see this Th2 suppression, a lot of Th1 dominance. They're very histamine, right? Like, oh, I have allergies to this. I'm sensitive to that. And I'm like, I bet you are. Oh, they found 72 grasses. And I'm like, sure, they did. Um, but then they can't actually use Th2 to like identify a parasite or a virus. And so I kind of start going for the mold first. I mean, we definitely have to play whack-a-mole sometimes. Like, you know, with COVID, Epstein-Barr just got Because when you start running these tests, we're like virus, 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 virus. I'm like, so instead of maybe worrying about 5 viruses, let's maybe worry about your immune system instead, because we can actually start to measure that. What's going on where. It's a US only test, so it's kind of a buzzkill for all the patients overseas because they're like, I want to do that. And I'm like, sorry, can't really float that boat. Um, but so then we can get very specific because what we don't want to do is like strengthen the immune system for people with autoimmunity infections. That's like the most ridiculous idea. And but by the same token, I find we don't really want to suppress it. I know the solution, like back to neurologists, let's just give them a round of steroids maybe. And I say that's cool, but now they're not going to fight the infection as well. So yeah, you're cutting off the inflammation in their brain, but to me, inflammation is always a necessary evil. Like back to pruning, after somebody gets a head injury, we know the immune system has to clean things out first. I always tell people just taking a bunch of turmeric right after you hit your head is probably a ridiculous idea. Like, because you're just shutting off all this inflammation that needs to be happening. And we know from the cell danger response, hopefully someone's talked about that in your practice before. Okay, yeah. So I say we know phase one is like, yo, we got to get this innate immune system like to start just ripping out all this broken stuff first. So to me, I think we need to complete the inflammation and healing cycle more than anything. Um, but then because I'm ex-military, so I always use those analogies. I would say the brain is a target-rich environment for the immune system. There's so many different ways for it to start attaching onto stuff that can look like maybe a virus, or it can look like this bacterial. Because I just say it's like maybe we don't really look alike, but say the police are like, ah, he's a white dude, 6 feet tall, brown hair. That's maybe both of us, right? Like, okay, so we'd still be next to each other on the lineup. So that's where I say we see these epitopes, but then we know the immune system's like, hey, this might be like a myelin basic protein, or this could be a dopamine receptor, or something like that. So molds don't have that molecular mimicry, but from overall, we just look at the overall immune dysregulation, and we find it'll wreck it for sure.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah,
There's controversy in mold testing, right? Some
yeah,
people do urine testing, some people look at immune testing, some
hmm
people are looking up in the nose, right? And there's different ways that we can try to look at it.
yeah.
What have you found from your clinical experience is because I've had patients too have enough money, they run every test, right?
Yeah,
I've
that's
run multiple
yeah.
urine mycotoxin tests. They're all different sometimes, right? This lab says this,
Yeah.
the lab says this, and the immune
hmm
says this. And so can you explain a little bit about the different type of testing that people do for
Yeah.
mold? And then what do you find clinically seems to help your patients the most?
Yeah, for sure. Circling back to the genes, if there's HLA genes, there's usually CYP genes. So the cautionary tale I have for urinary mycotoxins is it doesn't show exposure, it shows excretion. Working with a 5-year-old, mom says, while I'm pregnant, first 4 years of her life, townhome was moldy. We know that. Look at the ERMI, see all the big Latin words like, oh, you have globosa and all that crap, Aspergillus niger. I'm like, okay. So we run a urinary mycotoxin test, all green. So I'm like, mom's like, yeah. And I'm like, So I'm like, and they were saying the same thing. Money's not really a problem. So I was like, so let's do this. Let's just take some glutathione and then let's run it in 3 days.
Okay.
It went from all green to all red. And the dad's like pissed, like, what are you doing to my daughter? And I'm just like, dude, think about it. She breathed it in, she didn't pee it out. I give her something, now she's peeing it out. And I'm like, what do you think we need to keep doing? And he's like, peeing it out. And I'm like, yeah, bro. So we know that urinary mycotoxins, there's some limitations. Um, there's a genetic factor. Can people even get rid of it? That's usually a big one, but it doesn't show total body burden. So then, like if somebody, because I use urinary mycotoxins a lot, but we have to put it into context, right? So then I just actually saw a gliotoxin. It's like 400 some. So I'm like, yeah, it's not on the cornflakes. Like, there's no way that like this is like an environmental.
Yeah.
So then I say, well, say you have 400, but I don't know if you have 400 million, 400 billion. Like, how much is in the body entirely? Nobody can figure that out right now. Like, if you figure that out, you won't have to work tomorrow. Trust me, because everyone's after that. So there's limitations there. So sometimes we'll do provoked and non-provoked. I do also the blood ones as well, but for that we have to, does somebody even make B cells to make antibodies? If they're truly immune suppressed like COVID, I would see some patients with COVID, their white blood cell would be like a 1.8. And, they're like all like, "Do you have AIDS?" And we're like, "No, she doesn't have AIDS. She just got COVID." So then we have to base it on, does somebody have a functioning immune system? Which by definition of autoimmunity, we know that's not the case. It's a dysfunction somewhere along kind of all that balance it's supposed to find. So then I go for the ERMIs, the environmental relative mold index, and then I tell them, if we can just make the Latin match, if I can find that chetoglobosin and I can find it here, or I can find an Aspergillus versicolor and we can find that toxin here, or fusariums and fumonisins, I'm like, now we can connect the dots. Now, somewhere, both of those tests are telling us the same thing, so I think that's the truth. Um, but then, you run into the things like, well, we moved out of the house, we did this, that, and the other. Then I'd say, I've had people check couches. Girl goes off to college, gets pots from, the dorms. So she moves back in with dad. We find out it's mold. Um, Roommates try to leave the couch in the driveway. She picks it up with dad, passes out in the driveway for the first time. And like, she hadn't had an event in like 3 months at that point. Like, she was good.
Mhm.
Um, so then I just told her, I was like, just write free on cardboard and just have your dad put it on the couch and never look at it again. Because we know those things eat cellulose or all the plant materials like cotton and all that stuff and wood. Um, so then I just try to see like what kind of makes sense. And then we also do look at colonization sometimes. That can be a big deal. To me, if somebody's like, yeah, my son just gets random nosebleeds, I'm like, they have mold in their nose until proven otherwise. We know they use a thing called hyphae or spears. They're just going to stab into it. Those spears are going to make proteases. So then they make Swiss cheese out of it. And now they're getting into the blood and the blood is getting out. So they're pretty gnarly that way. We can find colonization in the small intestine through urine, and sometimes we'll do cultures in the cough. We'll just have people cough it up basically. Or yeah, we'll just have people basically do like a COVID test and start shoving that Q-tip way in the back and then pulling it all the way forward. And we can do that to be very specific. I find that helps with the pharmacology. Like, hey, if they need this antifungal or antibiotic, like this is the one to give them. But to back to being simple, I just use silver spray right out of the gate. It's antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral. It degrades biofilm. It's not going to be toxic. Like one guy made it in his basement and turned purple, but like we know that's not really going to happen. Um, but to me, that's like kind of because when I work with people from a functional medicine standpoint, I say like we got to do these things in phases. Like we can't just like go like squat 500 pounds the first day we're in the gym. You're gonna die. So like let's build up to it maybe. But usually one of the first things I like to hear for anyone exposed to mold or they're like, yeah, my son, my 4-year-old's congested. They breathe like that through the night. They think he has sleep apnea. I'm like, sure he does. That's why I tell them, like, if we're out of mold, we need to clear up that nose as fast as possible. 2 weeks is usually to me kind of like a standard. Then I think, well, if it's not clearing up after 2 weeks, maybe not out of the woods, but like, hey, we're noticing it's better. Then I say, then we maybe got to bring in big guns like snorting probiotics, putting all these herbs and stuff that burn up your nose. Don't try to do that. Because to me, if it's a little $20 bottle of silver spray that works for them, I'm like, cool, that's super cheap. It works, it's safe. Um, so I kind of go for that.
Cool. And then one of the arguments against urine testing is you're exposed every day in your food and the environment to mold.
Yeah,
So why don't you explain a little bit of how we are exposed? Forget about having a moldy house. What
yeah.
the normal exposure that we all deal with
Ooh.
every day?
Yeah, garden stuff. I mean, people that garden all the time, especially if they have a water sprinkler. I used to work in lawn care, so water sprinklers, they would like get the garden at night. We'd say all that mulch is just sitting there rotten. Because I've had dudes with Parkinson's that were farmers and they would like take the de down tree on a tractor, go pull it to the dead tree pile, start like cutting it up with a chainsaw and be like, my Parkinson's worse after a chainsaw. And we think vibration, you should be totally good, man. So then we're like, hey, you got mold and all this dead and dying stuff. So there is exposure in food, um, and there is kind of that consistent kind of level. And they even mention that in a lot of reports, like, hey, this could be maize, and this could be this, that, and the other. Um, but part of me, that's where I use the term rich versus wealthy. Like if the cutoff of urinary excretion is like a 3 and they're at like a 400 or something, I'm like, yeah, I don't think the cornflakes are that moldy, you know? Like you'd probably see it and be like, ugh. Um, so to me, if the food is moldy enough, and one time I know it's a gross story, I was like eating a meat stick, and I didn't look at it. I just opened it, but I bit into it, and it was the most bitter thing I've ever tasted in my life. And I looked down at it, and I was like, ugh, mold. So I spit it out, and I'm like getting baking soda. Pro tip for ingested mold, baking soda is one of the few things that actually works. So I'm just like getting baking soda water in my mouth, like swishing it, spitting it. So I'd say I think our bodies kind of develop these kind of senses to like, hey, this doesn't taste good or this tastes rancid or bad. Um, but there's also a lot of chemicals in the environment. We specifically spray fungicides on our foods so it doesn't grow mold on it. I mean, if you look at UVC lights, like we know that that's a big trick we use in people's homes because we're like, well, how do they kill mold and viruses and bacteria on food? UVC lights. How do they sterilize water? UVC lights. So we're like, maybe just put that around stuff. So I'd say so there's a lot of things that are kind of meant to stop that, but it's not unheard of. Because like we buy all our produce is organic, and I say the downside of none of those chemicals is we'll like open up the blackberries and be like, I'll eat 5 or 6, and then I'll find one underneath. I'm like, ooh, that one's a little moldy. So then I just chunk it, and I'm like, but I did eat those 5 or 6.
Mhm.
So I know there's some, but I don't know if it's always clinically relevant for a lot of people.
And how about blood work? Let's say sometimes we'll run IgG or IgE to look
Yeah,
at mycotoxins, and let's just say you have a high level of an immune response to mold or to these
yeah,
mycotoxins. Do you treat that differently? And if that's the case, is there ever a way
yeah.
to get the immune system to the point where you can walk or be exposed to mold without just completely getting symptomatic? Or is it one of
Ooh.
those things where once you've got the memory,
Yeah.
you're kind of always primed to being susceptible?
Yeah, let me answer the first one. Oh gosh. So that's where for the IgG and IgE, we definitely pay attention to those, especially if someone has the inhalants, like we're like, hey, you gotta stay out of that building. No wonder you have an albuterol inhaler, right? Like you actually have like anaphylaxis in your lungs. Um, but then for the IgG, I'll usually go again back to history. We just start looking like what are they telling me? What are we noticing? Do I see variants in symptoms based on location or something like that? And then it does shake down into, well, what mold toxin are we talking about? It's not just like, here's your activated charcoal, good luck. Because I say some of them are more, we're like, man, we got to get to the kidneys. Man, we really got to protect mitochondrial cell walls. Like there's so much. So I focus on, yeah, we got to get rid of the toxins, but I just say the dirtiest thing in the kitchen is the sponge. So I got to protect all these organs that are filtering it out, that are becoming susceptible. Like I've had people tell me that feed horses because it was in the barn. Both women told me my bones are starting to hurt with this new detox stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, we can't get any deeper than bone marrow. But their fuminescens are known to cause like issues with bone marrow. So that's where we're like, oh my gosh. So and there's like these case studies. It's really weird when you start like, being a nerd like us and just like, let me PubMed mold. There was this one case study of these people, they like inherited a farm. They went into the barn for the first time in like a long time. Dude didn't even make it out of the hospital. He died in like 2 days. The wife barely hung on to life. And I'm just, I've had cautionary tales. And to the point of people getting better, I have seen it. Kid with autism pans, mom said what we all want to hear as clinicians. It's like it never happened. Nobody can tell he's autistic. He's not trying to stab his brother with scissors, nothing crazy. And we're like, cool. They get exposed to mold, whole house starts falling apart except him. I would like to pat myself on the back, but I think, man, his body was capable of healing though. And he was young enough where he still had a thymus. So I believe that's, as you know, the thymus is like negative selection, like, hey, let's maybe leave this stuff alone. Like, let's just try to forget about it, right? Um, So, anyways, I wonder if it was age or kind of that resiliency. That was a big term that came up after COVID. Like, well, how resilient are you? Because we always kind of shoot for the moon, right? Like I tell all my patients, like after this, I never really want to have to talk to you again. Like I want you to feel better and just go live your life. But so they found mold in the home. The grandpa of him is a farm boy. I can fix this house. He couldn't. He died in the hospital 2 weeks later, peeing and pooping blood. It was Stachybotrys, and that one's known to cause hemorrhaging. Like kids have died from like bleeding lungs. Like I'm talking newborns with this stuff. So that's why back to the ERMI and people like checking it for the environment. I say if you get some redneck with coveralls and bleach, he's gone. Don't even let him in your house. He's going to make it worse. The person that truly knows about mold, they have goggles. They have like a real N95 probably down by their throat so they can talk to you, and they're putting on gloves because they are not going to touch this stuff. I'm like, that's the person that knows what they're doing because they know if I like breathe this stuff in, like I might die. Um, you know,
Yeah, I live in
so
a town. We moved here a few years ago, and a lot of these houses were built in like early 2000s, like 2003 to 2008. There's obviously
yeah.
homes, but like those are like the main ones. And what happened
Hmm.
was they imported a bunch of Chinese drywall. And
Oh,
when they
okay.
got the
Yeah.
Chinese drywall, it turned out it was extremely toxic.
Hmm.
And so what happened was the government actually gave people money to fix up their home. And there's a number of people that took the money and just left and didn't do anything to their home.
Oh, wow.
We actually looked for homes a few years ago. There was a home we really liked, and we walked in, and everyone, even my uncle who knows nothing about mold, we
Yeah.
all looked at each other and said, "What is that?" And then we started sneezing. We started
Yep.
out and we're wondering why this house is so cheap, right? It was a beautiful
Yeah. Yeah.
house. It was undervalued. And we just thought to each other, like, that person dipped. Like they left.
Yeah.
They didn't fix the home, and it's still Chinese drywall. Which brings me to my point is there's different mycotoxins you can test for. There's
Hmm.
different fungal issues and mold issues. Can you break down some of the more common mycotoxins you see, how that relates to different types of mold or fungus, and kind of what each
Yeah.
one kind of represents to you? Because I see, like my patients that really got exposed, a lot of times I see that you're a mycotoxin, everything's high. Like it's across
Yeah.
the board,
Yeah.
everything's high. And you look at that, you're like, what do I do with that? Because if I just break down one of these mycotoxins, that's bad enough.
Yeah.
They got everything. So do you want to
Yeah.
break down the viewers kind of
Yeah.
how these mycotoxins relate to specific types of molded fungus and what does that mean to the body?
Yeah. Like with Aspergillus, we're usually going to be looking at different types of aflatoxins. And even on the retesting, like I had one patient, aflatoxin M1 down in the green, B1 or the blue one, or whatever. That one barely nudges at all. But I was even telling him, like, we know this one's hard to get rid of. Like, there's some enzymes we can use, but it's like, infectious bacterial enzymes. So I don't know if giving you an upper respiratory tract is like the best idea. Like, let's maybe not go that road. Ochratoxin A is super common. I see that one. Well, I work with a population of autistic kids. So, do I attract that or is it the population, susceptibility? But that one will like straight up kill tyrosine hydroxylase cells, the apoptosis. So then these kids, they quit smelling and they can't even make dopamine to save their life. So then we're just like, cool. So that one's pretty bad. Gliotoxins, aspergillus. Then fusarium is going to be common. I find that one being sometimes kind of the food, maybe more environmental, like, hay, stuff like that. Like if people are sometimes outside a little bit more, rotten wood. Um, but that's going to be like a lot of the fumonisins, zerenolione. Sorry, I hate doing all the specific stuff. I
That's
usually like
okay.
all, but that's where the ones that really want to watch out for are Stachybotrys. And then like chitoglobocin only makes chitoglobocin A. Like so there's certain ones that make certain things, but even if you take like Stachybotrys chartarum, they're like, well, these ones that make roridins, they actually don't make like this other trichothecene, like a Dawn or something. So we find sometimes even the same strain can make different kinds of mold toxins. It's really, that's where I love the brain. It's like, to me, I don't want to say it's simple, but the brain is like a computer wiring diagram. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. We just kind of find the pathway, right? And if you know the big words, you can play the big games. But I say the immune system's like always an exception to the rule. That's like, oh, well, this was going on while this was going on, and then we're like, oh, great. Um, but that's where back to the Stachybotrys, when I see that in patients, I tell them, ex-military, I say, that's not the one you want. None of these are great, but that Stachybotrys, I was like, that's the one you really can't get rid of. They even talk about it in the Old Testament of the Bible, like just cut the leather. If it grows again, shut the door and just leave. Like, don't even take anything from it. And that's why we left everything in our apartment. Um, because people, to me, the best solution for mold is to get out of it. Like, and that's where, like, I understand that Amex bill and sitting on lawn chairs while we're waiting for a couch to come in because there's no way I'm bringing the couch from the moldy apartment into my house, right? So I get that pain, trust me. But I say, but what's it worth to feel better? And not to sound dismissive, but I work with a lot of people that, well, you're the same boat. Everyone's really sick, right? Like everyone depends on you to really get them better. So their quality of life is just spiraling. Um, but that's where I just say it doesn't matter if you see the guy that wrote books about it, if you take the most expensive supplements on the planet and the doctor had a 2-year waiting list. I'm like, you're never going to get better if you're breathing it in. That's just the way I see it clinically. So to me, the first step is always get out of it and then try to see like, yeah, what can happen. It does sometimes take a lot of supplements. I don't want to say that, but that's where pooping, peeing, and sweating. Like we know we'll sweat out some mold toxins better than you poop and pee them out. So that's where trying to use that natural detoxification. And if you start actually looking at a lot of the research, like I always use the radish as an example, it's actually better at getting rid of some of these verucarins, like very bad mold toxins, than all the stuff we would think like garlic, ginger, turmeric. And I'm like, wow. So if you start actually looking at a lot of these detox supplements, I'm like, it's parsley, it's like broccoli seed. I'm like, of course, we're not eating the broccoli seeds, but I was like, half the stuff people take are foods. And I was like, so I start utilizing, mainly I start to focus on the bacteria and the fibers, start with the gut and kind of start getting it out that way, making sure the liver is doing its thing, kidneys, make sure they're sweating and hydrated, etc. And then I'll start the binders like, well, now let's maybe take this because typically things are kind of less immune reactive. I know you probably got to go soon.
No, we're good. That
Say,
was great. I got questions. I'm writing things down so I don't forget.
oh yeah, because when something's just sitting there, I say that mold toxin's already shoved back in the drawer. It's not really that immunoreactive anymore. It's already where it's gonna go. Like it's when we start stirring it up and detoxifying too fast. That's when I just tell people like, I know I can push you over. Like back to the girl with seizures, we're like, we got to get rid of this mold. I'm like, yeah, but we got to do it like delicately. I'm not trying to push her into seizureville right now. Um,
And for sure,
so
we're in no rush, by the way. I just got a note because I got things
yeah,
to ask you and I don't want to forget them.
yeah, of course.
So let's keep adding that. The one thing that we look at sometimes is gliotoxins. And it seems like with gliotoxins, people could be like sulfur sensitive, right? And it seems
Yeah.
like, glutathione could be a little different. And so why
hmm
don't you talk a little about like gliotoxins and like how foods, because sometimes you mentioned foods, but
Yeah.
sometimes you could take a supplement that should be really good for one person, but maybe if they have high levels of gliotoxins, you want to address that first, it might not be the best thing.
Yeah. And that's where kind of back to the mold and colonization, I always check for that too. Because I say getting rid of mold toxins is one thing, but killing aspergillus in your gut, that's something else entirely. So as we know, they do quorum sensing. They start building all this biofilm and they just start attracting all this bad stuff. But I find a lot of sulfur-reducing bacteria being able to thrive with the gliotoxins. So we know SRBs, what we call them on the street corner if you want to buy some. We're like, hey, I get egg farts, I get broccoli farts, I take this sulfur stuff, I feel worse. They're like, I have cheap jewelry that turns my skin funny colors, and I'm like, oh, like you might have some sulfur reducing bacteria. And those can be, there's a lot of different ones that can do that. So then I know it's a mold toxin thing, but part of me wonders, is it part of that immune suppression for T and B cells? And then if they're colonized, can these bacteria just start dogpiling? Um, it's always a chicken and or an egg, right? Like, am I finding the cause or am I finding the result? So sometimes I just come at it from both ends, right? I mean, what else are we gonna do? Um, but then that can be like Klebsiella, Clostridia. Pseudomonas is the worst. If it's Pseudomonas aeruginosa, not only can they eat that sulfur, but they make the hardest biofilm of anything ever found, and that becomes a big challenge. Because how do you start breaking down biofilm in the nose if you're going to try to use a bunch of proteolytic enzymes that are just going to degrade their nasal epithelium too? So it's like, so that's where we get to like maybe snorting probiotics. I'm like, well, we can use other microbes instead, right? Like I try to think I'm kind of weird, but I try to, find another way around it, right? So then we might start doing some sort of that stuff. But to me, kind of pro tip for the sulfur reducing bacteria, what I find is people don't empty out their water heaters. You're supposed
That,
to do that annually, and that can actually start to grow in that sort of stuff.
okay, interesting.
Um, yeah, so sometimes we're like, are you just drinking these bacteria all the time too? Because and that's okay, but there's all this stuff in water, right? Like, I always encourage people like, please filter your water. And the Berkey or not the Berkey, the cheap one, the one everybody gets. I don't even remember the name.
Yeah, I know.
Um,
As a Brita,
yeah,
the one.
yeah, but because we're always worried about the chemicals, but there can be. I mean, stuff living in the pipes and in the water heaters and stuff. But then with the sulfur reducing bacteria, we have to cut out the sulfur. But then I'm more of a fan of kind of the fibers. I don't like to always be supplements, but one is called propylmanin. It's
Okay.
called Optifiber Lean. It's from Zymogen. They market it for weight loss and satiety, but I'm like, you guys are missing the boat. This basically works like cholestyramine, but it's a fiber. Only we don't run into the, oh, low testosterone, low cholesterol. Now they're anemic. Like we don't see those chronic issues long term, but it's such a sticky fiber that I just say that basically all that gunk in that bile, it's not being pulled back in at the end of the small intestine. So now you're just pooping all this stuff out. And people tell me like my poop stinks after starting that fiber. And I'm like, yeah, that was going to be pulled back in your body for like the 18th time too. Um,
For
so
sure.
anyways, yeah, I just find with the detox, you have to kind of like work up to it, kind of like with the neuro rehab, right? You can't like maybe go to like, antipsychotics in a 4-year-old with inhibition issues. They're like gonna be crying and sweating on the floor.
Mhm.
Um,
Cool. I actually, when I was in Miami, we had a water system
mhm.
that took humidity out the air because we're in Miami, and then
Yeah.
it had like a 12 carbon filtering system at UV light, and so
Oh,
you're pretty
nice.
there's not a perfect solution, but we
Yeah.
just decided to get. I'm a little tight on my water. That's one thing I'm kind of very picky on, and so I
Hmm.
decided maybe the best thing is take the humidity and just clean it really well and just get
Yeah.
off the pipes, right? And that machine, that company actually, and it was solar panels, so you could put it out in anywhere. And it,
Nice.
well, you could plug it in if it was solar, but the company is sold, so we couldn't use it anymore. So now we're
Mm.
getting mountain spring water in glass, right? So
Yeah.
big glass. And again, it's not perfect because even I don't know if you've seen that. There's research on water and glass. They still have microplastics, right? And so
Yeah,
it's a little
well,
bit of a
because
tricky
there's
thing.
part of the production, and that's where, I mean, since we're on microplastics, like I ran a toxin panel,
Mhm.
and this lady's like, I got a catheter, she's got like a freaking peg tube, and I'm like, yeah, well, I know you have plastic, like I know where this is coming from. And kind of to those toxin points, I even tell patients, like, look, at 2025, I expect there to be like 2 hib from diesel exhaust, BPA, like parabens from your perfumes. Like I expect that. That's the world we live in. But back to like, wow, your gliotoxin is like 5-fold the reference range. Like I don't expect that. That kind of strikes me as odd. Let's maybe hone in on that instead of these other maybe incidental findings. Um,
Well, and you mentioned before we talk about location,
mhm.
let's talk about reservoirs, right? And so when someone gets exposed to mold, how much are you looking at where is the mold versus a systemic immune response, right? Because people know about SIBO, might not know about SIFO, right? And fungal
Yeah,
issues,
yeah,
right? They also like, are you as concerned of where the mold is? Is it in the gut? Is it in the nose? Is it in the lungs? Is it in the prostate?
yeah.
Where it may be? Or are you more saying we're just going to have to systemically address both the immune response and wherever the
Mhm.
mold is, it is what it is.
Yeah, to me it's both, right? Like I think of it like a fire extinguisher. If the fire is over here, I can't put it out by pointing it over here. And to the point I say like, man, if you had that CFO, that sucks, but it's leaking into your bloodstream. Your liver is at least like, let me call some immune cells, let me get this involved. You're trying to clean it out before it gets systemic. Say, but if it's in your nose, you're screwed. That leaks into your brain. One of the things we look at, I mean, for like people that just had like a brain surgery, they're like, hey, if you think your nose is running, please go to the ER. You might be leaking CSF. So we're like, wait, what? So anyways, I say to me, that's where it's usually a huge priority is cleaning up the nose. And the lungs are definitely problematic. Like I've had people cough up black stuff, and I'm like, that's like black mold. Like, what do you think you're coughing up? You don't smoke, you don't vape. So then we're just nebulizing, like breathe, and everyone did that for COVID. The beauty of working with mold is everyone has a nebulizer after COVID. So I'm like, cool, because we just got to start breathing a bunch of stuff in now. She was actually the one with the black coughing up the black stuff. She was the one that was pregnant while she had a baby in the
Okay.
mold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Sounds
I
like a
mean, she's like restless legs. She's like, even when I'm feeding him and it's like it should be nap time, his legs are go, just go. And I'm like, oh, poor kid.
Yeah, and there's
Um,
a lot of research. You mentioned interleukin 6, 17. I'd
mhm.
recommend anyone interested look in the research of these cytokines and development. Like what
Yeah,
happens, another, not to use any specifics, but what happens to a baby who's got high interleukin 17?
yeah,
What happens to a baby who's got high interleukin 6, right? When you look at these immune imbalances, what does that do to the brain? And there's
yeah,
actually a plethora of research, not specific to why, but specific to immune dysregulation causing developmental issues, right?
yeah.
And I
So,
always,
and that's because people always look for that one thing, and I say it doesn't work that way. Like I just tell people, if I want to jack up somebody's brain that's genetically susceptible, I'll just expose them to mold. I don't know what's gonna happen, but I know something's gonna happen.
Mhm.
Like something's gonna break eventually. Like it can only handle so much.
It seems
So.
like I assume,
Hmm?
but it seems like it's beyond testing and observation that neurodevelopmental disorders are higher now than they were 30 years ago. It seems like concussions and post-traumatic syndromes are higher now than they were
Yeah.
30 years ago. It seems like dementias are higher now than they were 30 years ago. We're better at addressing them, but like I don't think
Yeah.
it's a kid who was mute, at school. Like, I think,
Yeah.
and I would say that the underlying physiology to your point seems to be immune dysregulation.
Yeah. And I get it. We are better at like finding autism now, but I'd say that's like saying there's more fat people because we have better scales though. Like show me the 65-year-old like, and I'm not talking about skipped prom and quirky engineer, like you're self-diagnosed at 30. You don't have autism, dude. I was like, I'm talking about the kid that like their mom has to tape boxing gloves to their hands so they don't scratch their eyes out and while they're banging their head against the wall while they're pooping themselves at 19. I don't see them at that age. So something's going on. And I know it's a topically, like it's a hot topic, like hot button. Like I don't want to try to get you like blacklisted or banned because I've mentioned stuff on these things and you're like, yeah, now my algorithm's screwed and nobody sees my stuff. And I'm like, sorry, man, but I got to tell the truth. But to me, back to immune dysregulation, I think I just try to avoid and have my kids avoid as many immune triggers as possible. You
Let's
can't
talk
have them live in a bubble,
for
like,
sure.
because we know those old school kid things, and I know again it's a hot topic, but like, we know if someone has chicken pox, their odds of like certain cancers really start to plummet. Same thing with measles. Like I think it's what neuroglioblastoma like reduces by half in 50s and 60s just by having a rash when we're young. And I think, wow, that sounds to me it sounds like boot camp for the immune system. Let's train it, right? But then we have these things that were like made in labs. Like, and I know it's hot topic, and you can say I have a tinfoil hat. Lyme, we know is made in the lab. HIV made in the lab by the same dude that made COVID. Like this isn't like rocket surgery, because then I say, because now we can see these very specific parts of these like pathogens that skipped like 10,000 years of evolution. Because all these viruses in us and all these bacteria, we've all been around for like basically the same time, right? So we've all had a chance to like act, react, 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 and kind of this give and take, right? And we know they're not all bad, but then I say, but then you like hodgepodge these things like some Dr. Moreau, and you have these certain traits that never evolved in a bacteria or a virus. And I was like, and now we see what it does to us. It'll wreck the wrong person. I was one of those people, like I got COVID and not a brag, but I was like stuffy nose for a couple days. But literally, I was watching everyone else around me just kind of fall apart. And I have kind of my dad's immune system, like never get sick type stuff. I got autoimmunity, so it's definitely strong, but I don't really get like an upper respiratory tract infection like everyone else typically. Um,
And to your
but
point, people are taking parasites to reduce autoimmunity now. Not saying they should, but you
yeah,
look at like India and you look at some of these ideas, the
yeah.
more parasites you have, the less autoimmune.
Helminthic therapy, yeah.
Correct, right?
So I know you're gonna laugh at me. I actually, if I have a lupus patient, my first thought is, I wonder if I should give them Decatur americanus. I give them some little, but because I learned about it actually from a lupus patient.
Okay.
He told me like I got a parasite from my dog. And I'm like, oh, do you want anything to kill it? Like, what's the plan? She's like, no, I feel great. She's like, I'm not having to take my meds. I'm off all the supplements you gave me. And I'm like, shut the front door. So I started reading about it, and I'm just like, there's something to this. Because as we know, lupus is like the only Th2 dominant, like autoimmune process. Everything else is basically way over here on Th1. But then if we find, well, parasites actually suppress Th2, then I'm like, it kind of makes sense. I talked to immunologists and they're like, let's maybe not go there first. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying, might not be the best long-term idea. Um, but that's where, like, to the point of Lyme, like, before we were recording, you're talking like people don't get rid of it. Like, I've seen special forces dudes that they're not even sick. They're just like, I want to stick around for my kids. And all of their Lyme was like positive, 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 positive. And I'm like, I don't want to go after this, man. I'm like, you found homeostasis with this pathogen. It is what it is. If you develop Neuroline 20 years from now, come talk. But then I saw a dude, rich guy, traveling the world, been to India. He's from India. I saw like six parasites on his poop test. Again, no symptoms, no bloating, no constipation, no weird things. Because I've had parents say things like, is it weird my daughter only has seizures on a full moon? She had three parasites. So I'm like, no, that's not poppycock. Like the whole full moon thing is actually legit. I thought it was weird at first too, until I had so many moms like, okay, this is starting to make sense. Um, but then, that guy's fine. I'm like, you found homeostasis. So to me, there's like, and we all know homeostasis is finding that balance. So to me, I'd say that's what I'm trying to find is like, has somebody's body found maybe homeostasis with a candida or a parasite or a virus? Because if not, again, back to Dr. Carol Lovitz, like, because then if a kid tells me like, yeah, I got mono and then my world fell apart and I developed MS in college, I'm like, let's totally get rid of that Epstein-Barr. But half the time we're looking for infections, you always find Epstein-Barr. And I just tell you like 99% of the world had it. So why maybe that one person is so to me it's either allostatic load, like it was just finally the straw that broke the camel's back, or if you start to look at immunology research, they're like, hey, we find that, we'll say H. pylori is a trigger for certain autoimmune diseases, actually a lot. But then they find, well, the people that actually get triggered for autoimmunity by that pathogen, they're actually genetically susceptible to be more infected by that pathogen. So then we're like, wait a minute. To me, that starts to blow my mind when I read that. I'm like, freaking genetics, man. Um, so that's where, as a clinician, as you know, there's no such thing as a perfect test. I just tell the patients, like, if I can get three or four tests to agree with what you're telling me, I think that's the closest version to the truth I'm ever going to find. Because I can run more tests and we can find more things. But with functional medicine, the more you test, the more you find. And like on average, my tests are like 78 pages. And I'm like, what am I going to give you? Like 100 pills? You know? Like,
Sure. That's what some people do. I, I
yeah,
I
that's
take more
sad
people
too.
off supplements and put them on, and I give people supplements. But like a
Yeah.
lot of times, I'm taking people off stuff because they're taking so much stuff, and sometimes it's just a lot of health stuff. It's not even purposeful, right? They're
Yeah.
taking so many general health supplements. There's nothing intentional to try to decrease triggers.
Yeah. I see
And
people like, oh, I got this multi and these methyl Bs, and I'm taking a B12, and I'm like, how much B vitamins do you need? Like,
a lot of expensive pig, right?
Yeah.
And then I see, I'm curious your thoughts. Like we test for autoimmune conditions, your lupus, your rheumatoid arthritis. What it
Hmm.
seems to me is I'm finding a lot of chronic inflammatory conditions. It's almost like the innate immune system's gone wild.
Yeah.
And as a society, again, we have to get into details and names, but we know, like for the brain, for example, we're going to start with primitive reflexes, right? And we're going to
Yeah.
start with basic reflexes. And as those reflexes interact, we're going to develop higher level brain function, higher level proprioceptive mechanisms, higher level
Yeah.
visual systems, higher level vestibular systems. And as that level picks up, it's going to suppress the lower system. It's going to integrate it. And we're
Hmm.
able to move more complex or with more complexity. And as we move with more complexity, other areas of brain develop. So it's like sequential. And I
Yeah.
wonder how much of society we've just, and I get it, right? No one wants to die from an infection. And the better our B cells are at tagging things, the quicker we can respond. But I
Hmm.
wonder sometimes with the immune system how much we've biased our adaptive system and how
Hmm.
much we've trained, like how much we've trained directly to get these B cells active. And
Yeah.
did we not allow the innate system to learn? Because I think we think the innate system's dumb, but it's actually pretty good, right? It might not
Yeah.
act as quick, but
Yeah, I
it
mean, it
detects
has
a
to
lot of
be told
patterns,
what to
right?
do, but it'll follow instructions, right?
It detects a lot of
Uh,
patterns, and it could pick up. It might not say this is this infection, but it could look at patterns.
yeah.
It could attack it. It could keep it at bay.
Yeah.
I
It can
wonder
find a
how
PAMP, it can find a DAMP. It doesn't need an antibody all the time, you know?
correct. And so I wonder
Uh,
how much of my patients or of society have these chronic inflammatory conditions because it's almost like an immature system
Yeah.
because it never really developed sequentially. It didn't start in the mucous membrane, right?
Yeah.
It started directly in the bloodstream in some ways,
It's
right?
funny. Well, you probably get asked the same amount I do. What do you take when you're sick? Everybody asks me that. And honestly, not a brag, I tell people I try not to take anything. I don't want to teach my immune system. It's always going to get some help. Like it needs to learn, it needs to figure this stuff out. Like back to like maybe how we bypass brain function. I don't remember all my numbers because they're in my phone. I don't remember the way to go because it's in my GPS. And I
Mhm.
say, so I think we're starting to try to almost accomplish the same thing. Because, and we super sterilize stuff. Because everyone's like, I don't know if you've ever been to Mexico. What do they say? Don't drink the water. And I'm like, who drinks the water there every day? People that live there. So it's not a water cleanliness issue. I'd say it's our microbiome and it's our immune system issue. Like it's a noodle arm dainty dork that's never been in a fight. And then you just throw it in like downtown Chicago and expect it to be fine. Um, you know, like so so I do like that education, but to the point of toxins, I say most, as you know, most toxicology studies are for an acute dose. What's going to kill them if they get a hold of it once? And does the kid like drink the bottle of bleach? But what they don't look for is what if we're exposed to it for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, just a little bit every day, and combine that with basically everything. I don't like panaceas in research, but I found one panacea in research. Basically, since cord studies done in the 1980s, the amount of toxins and number of toxins has only increased. It's never gone another way in any mammalian study. So then I'm like, oh crap, we are really screwing the pooch on this one. But that's like to that point. Like my kids take binders every day. I don't care if they take a Flintstones multivitamin. They have a healthy enough diet to get their nutrition from food. But I'm like, I watch my neighbors spray glyphosate. I watch them do chemtrails in the air. I watch the school bus drive by with diesel exhaust fumes. I'm like, that's what my kids are up against. Like that is that low load chemical, just like constant picking at the immune system.
So let's talk about that. Let's get into treatment, right? Because
Yeah,
I don't know if there's as many variations of treatment in mold compared to Lyme, let's say. But obviously, people
yeah.
with mold, there's different approaches. Obviously, Schumacher was like a big one earlier on, but there's different
Hmm.
people, and then there's different approaches. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to bind things? Are you going to kill things? Are you going to modulate the immune system? Are you going to?
Yeah,
So everyone's got different approaches. Why don't you discuss a little bit about how you approach mold
yeah,
systematically? And then some things maybe you can give tidbits as far as what are good things. You've mentioned charcoal,
yeah,
you've mentioned fibers, you've mentioned other things that may or may not be good. Like what are
yeah.
things that you find clinically has kind of held the test of time?
Yeah. First, I always start in the gut. I tell people the disease might not have started there, but from a functional medicine standpoint, I say that's usually kind of the foundation we have to make sure is secure so I can kind of build on top of that, right? That's when we start looking at the colonization. I do poop and pee. Sometimes we'll do up here, but honestly, if they're like, yeah, I'm congested all the time, I'm like, we'll run another test if we need to. Let's just get going at it, right? It's kind of like if you like see them having that wide stance, the cerebellar ataxia, you're like, okay, let's just start going for the cerebellum. Maybe we'll worry about left versus right a little down the road, but let's just start getting going, right?
Mhm.
Um, so kind of that same approach. So then we'll start killing, but killing's like an MMA fighter. You got to train for that stuff. You can't just hop in the ring. Like I would be decimated if I tried to fight MMA. I'd be like, do I get years of training? Um, but so that's where we do have to kill it. To me, I start with like breaking down the biofilm. To me,
Okay.
that's key. Like, let me just get the immune system able to at least see some of this stuff, bacteria to compete, so that way we can start to see like a level playing field, so to speak.
You give a binder
Um,
with that, or you just go right away and you start breaking things up?
Usually binders too. So I'll start with the fibers because we'll start in the gut too. But once we start getting systemic, then you kind of got to start giving binders. To me, humic and fulvic acid is a pretty kind of go-to. They work well. Of course, there's a lot of different companies, but you got that stuff's strong. That stuff's real strong. Like I tell people, they're like, "What? Little scoop the size of my pinky nail?" And I'm like, "Yeah, and you're gonna take like a fourth of that to begin with. Like, don't play with it."
Yeah.
Because that can be bad. But while the whole time we're doing that, I'd say I'm more focused on what I call protecting the system. Like if we know like, hey, there's some gliotoxin in there, I think, wow, their mitochondrial walls are really damaging. I'm going to give them melatonin. I know we think of melatonin as sleep, but what do we look at in histology slides? Melatonin's highest concentration, neuronal mitochondrial walls. So it's big for getting those engines to stay churning and burning. And to the basal ganglia's point, like, because, we look at mitochondrial function. Because they're like, no, my kid has energy. And I'm like, but they don't. Because I'm like, man, if their mitochondria are shot, I was like, a typical heart cell has like 10,000 mitochondria. I was like, a basal ganglionic cell is like 250,000 to 2 million, depending on the length. I was like, so the ability for your kid to inhibit and not hit somebody in class is like way more energy demand than anything else going on. Trust me. So then, because we know there's these mitochondriopathies, but to me, it's not adding rocket fuel into an engine that's rusty. That's what I find a lot of people do. They're like, let me just give some, this stuff to get this engine to go. And I'm like, that's the problem. It can't go right now. And you're going to throw a rod or something. And to me, modulating the immune system. I love peptides. I give peptides out like candy to even 18 months old. Like I give them to them young, depending on which one, right? We're always screening and making sure it's like the right one, dose dependent.
How do you
But
find the
then
right?
there are, oh, go ahead.
How are you picking the right one? Or is it clinically? Is it blood work? And which ones you like to use?
Clinically, we'll start looking at the immune system, trying to see like, well, what's going on? Is it more like an interferon gamma? Is it more like an interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 12? So then we'll start kind of figuring out like, do I give them a thymosin beta? Do I give them a thymogen? The TB frag. So like, do I give them a fracture? Do I give them the whole thing? I love KPV or the one that looks like MSH. I've never had anybody have a problem with it. Touch wood. Like, nobody's had a problem with that. And that's why I know, because I know the internet's like, oh, peptides, the devil. I'm like, they just can't be patented, so you can't like so Eli Lilly can't pick it up, right? Like that's why the internet's telling you it's bad. I was like, but as long as like somebody doesn't have maybe like certain tumors, not even on the radar. Like I don't even care.
And now
Um,
peptides are everywhere. Do you find a difference injectable versus sprays versus sublinguals?
as we know, like certain ones you have to spray. Like I use VIP spray a lot for people, and we know there's like no research for that being injected. Like Epitalon, you can swallow it, but I mean I'm after the brain, so a lot of the times we'll be
You're up the
taking.
nose mostly, so you're doing a lot of sprays up the nose.
Yeah, yeah. But then there are systemic ones. I have people swallow BPC, I have them swallow KPV, I have them swallow thymosin beta, and I get it. Nothing's absorbed more than an injectable.
Mhm.
But tell me you're gonna like shoot a kid up with a needle 3 times a week with peptides, like a 5-year-old. Like, come on. If I can just we put it in some juice and they just drink it, and we know that it gets systemic because people will swallow these pills and then they say things like, they're taking thymosin beta for inflammation, and they're like, yo, dude, my traps are getting big. Like, I am gaining muscle. And we're like, funny how that works, right? So maybe the absorption's like 92% instead of 100. Like,
Okay.
boo-hoo.
Okay. For the record, my computer died, and so I apologize about that. But why don't you keep on going? We're talking about peptides and
Yeah.
mechanisms and how you use them.
Yeah. Because to me, the peptides, the safety profile is super insanely good, right? Like they're signaling molecules made by the body for people who don't know. And it's like a key opens the lock. And as soon as that door opens, the cell changes its function. So I like to use those, but to me, I start to focus on the actual genetics of the cells first. I am a huge fan of bioregulators. Like clinically, I rarely see something work as good. So now we're talking to the genes of a cell. We're activating the receptor sites on that cell. And then typically what I find is we have to give the cofactors or the bricks, right? Like if I'm going to tell a cell like, hey, you need to detoxify, well, they need something to make like glucuronic acid out of. They need all this stuff. So I was like, so we have to get like kind of this fuel or these vitamins and minerals or, say whatever herb, milk thistle to help with glutathione transferase, whatever, right? So then we start kind of honing down on like, well, are we after a neuron? Are we after a kidney? Are we after a liver? Like, what are we actually trying to influence? Because it might be a pie in the sky thought process, but I find with combining functional medicine with functional neurology, especially with the brain, I think we're really able to replace organ function. Like,
Interesting.
and I know that's not like lightly said, but you see it, right? Neuroplasticity, and thinking, man, we can start just dumping stuff in these people too. Because for what people don't know, for bioregulators, they're like the signal for a cell to basically find homeostasis and work. And it's plug and play. We're like, hey, here's some for neurons, here's some for white matter, here's some for the neurovascular system, here's some for the liver. And you could just, like, I was talking to one of my biohacker patients, he's like, why don't I just take them all? And I'm like, why don't you, man? Like, just don't take the ovary ones because you obviously don't need that.
Are you
But
concerned
that's
at all about changes in like negative feedback with these things, or is it not really a concern for you?
It can be like VIP spray is context dependent. If a microglia or immune cell is like super active in the brain from interleukin 6, we know it's going to dampen that down. Yay. But if there's nothing going on, we actually activate the microglial cell by giving it VIP spray.
Interesting.
So there's certain things that like people die from too much water, right? So I say, so anything of too much can be bad. But that's where I try to focus on like safety. Like, so something like that, we're obviously monitoring, but like I've never seen anyone, I mean, other than like triple negative breast cancer, where we're like, oh, that BPC, like I've never seen anyone heal too fast.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's certain things I'm not super worried about. But like back to bioregulators, they discovered them like shortly after World War II. They've never found a contraindication. It's been like 70 years.
Interesting.
So I tell people like even if you have a neuroglioblastoma, I'm still gonna give them to you for your brain, and I'm not worried about it interacting with the cancer cells. It'll probably actually start turning off some of that P53K, and now your cells aren't going to be immortalized anymore. So like kind of you're welcome, right? Um,
So
but to me, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say you mentioned neuropeptides, immune modulation. You mentioned binders. What are you using to actually kill and to attack, whether it's
Yeah,
biofilm or mold, or using medication, or using herbs, or using other things? What
yeah.
exactly are you using?
Typically I use a lot of like herbs. And those are kind of like panaceas, right? Like there's like pau d'arco, oregano, olive, like so there's certain things. I find some are better than others. Like I personally don't use oregano oil just because the acidity. I say it's hard for like all the bacteria down there now.
Okay.
Um, but it can kind of vary based on what we're going after. Like I love ginger to break down biofilm, and it's actually extremely antiviral too. So we're like, hey, let's maybe use it for a little bit of both. Versus maybe are we invading biofilm with maybe like a probiotic? Like I love soil-based ones because we know they can invade biofilm. We know they can alter quorum sensing or how bacteria behave. So then we can also use proteolytic enzymes. But then, we kind of start to think of like, well, this 2-year-old can't really swallow a capsule, and we're not going to open up a capsule, right?
Mhm.
So then I'll maybe divert to like silver, monolauric acid, or lauricidin. That's a very
Okay.
common one. Because those are pretty safe, unless someone has like a coconut allergy for
Yeah.
the monolauric acid, then we're kind of worried about it. But I'm not anti-drugs. I was just talking with a 5-month-old.
Hmm.
They have mold. We found C. diff and Candida on the stool test, and I was like, I'm comfortable with killing the Candida in a 5-month old. Like, I have tools to do that. I was like, I'm not going to give your 5-month old exotic herbs. I was like, let's maybe just go for a round of antibiotics.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, not to sound mean, your kid's gut's already trashed. Like, we already got to pick it up, right? So, yeah, there's going to be antibiotics. Like, but to me, C. diff's bad. But back to that point, they're exposed to mycophenolic acid. And I asked them, I was like, do you know if you have mold in this home? And they're like, yeah. The mom pulled out her mycotoxin test and she's like, we know we have mold in this home. And that like crushed my heart because they're like trying to do all the right things. Young parents, kids 5 months old, right? It's her first one. And I just told them, like, y'all just got to get out of that house. Like, don't even spend the money on all these supplements right now. I was like, y'all just got to get out of here. Like, or there. Like, it's, back to square one. You've got to get out of that environment because you'll never get better in the same environment that made you sick. Like, you just
Got a
can't do it.
mutual friend, Dr. Cedarmark, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to him the other day, and something that I'm intrigued about is nebulizing exosomes,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I'm intrigued about that. So my first question is, tell me a little bit about the nebulizing exosomes and why do you do it? What do you think the benefit is versus that
Yeah.
versus infusions, versus obviously other types of stem cells? And then
Yeah.
what else are you nebulizing?
We kind of nebulize a lot. Peptides, like again,
Okay.
because we're trying to go straight to the brain. And the reason, like, and they've done studies, of course, they're in China, basically, but you look at the injection of exosomes and they trace it versus inhaling it. And there's like a couple little red spots in the brain from injecting it. But I mean, you basically look and it's like all of the brain stem, a lot of the white matter, it's just like this red cloud. And so you get way more into the brain when you just start to nebulize the exosomes.
Interesting.
I've done it a few times. I just get off the table and I'm like, that feels different, I'm kind of like, that's different. Like I can feel it, and I don't feel a lot. As you know, we're in a position where people like take my liver detox, and I don't feel stuff like 90% of the time I take a supplement. I just don't think I need a liver detox. Not saying it doesn't work, but
Yeah.
I feel bioregulators. I feel peptides. I feel exosomes. I was like, I feel this, and I don't think it's necessarily a placebo effect. I mean, there's always that chance, right?
Explain to
Um,
people what exosomes are and what's the purpose of them, right?
yeah.
I think
So
there's a lot buzz around
exosomes.
stem cells, right? But like
Yeah,
exosomes are a little
so
different.
exosomes are kind of like a text that helps cells talk to other cells so they can coordinate and communicate better. Because we know, for example, like my son's about to be 5, he actually has more neurons than me. I just have more connections. I've pruned it out more, right? So we know that it's not just like them all working, it's working together. That's where the true strength lies in an organ system, all those cells working for the same goal. And then stem cells, those are so that's where, well, back to the exosomes, they can backfire because if you have an active infection like Lyme, I'd be like, I don't know if I want to, they're going to get better at creating inflammation now because they can totally go to immune cells in the brain and really ramp that up. You see that, right?
Mhm.
You've seen it probably with patients, a similar thing. Oh, I took that IVIG, it made my MS worse. And we're like, yeah, don't do that again.
Yeah.
You know, like way too strong of a therapy. But stem cells are putting new cells into it. If someone's old enough, I typically just try to fast them out. Can't do it for little kids, right?
Yeah.
But um, but I think of stem cells as you got to do it in the right time. I think of it like you have a 50,000 gallon pool. It's only half full and the filter's broke. So then putting stem cells in is I'm just going to fill up the pool. I'm just going to put this nice clean water in there. I'm like, but the pool's still broken, dirty.
Mhm.
So these are the people that, and nothing against flying to Panama and spending 20K, but these are the people that I went twice and I saw nothing in my son. And that's actually something that, because I told this guy, we're like, hey, your kid's got mold. This is the autism. He's like, I want the shortcut. And I'm like, bro, there's no shortcuts to this.
Mhm.
Like, if there was, it would be the way everyone would go. And that would just be the way everyone goes. It's not a shortcut. Um, he's like, well, I want the shortcut. Did 2 rounds of stem cells. Nothing. Like it didn't even like they just flew across the world twice and did nothing.
Yeah.
Because they went back to the mold. So that's what, but then when it's the right environment, Because, back to spinal cord injury, TBI, cells being destroyed by mold toxins, I say, why not put new cells back in to replace them? Makes total sense. But then I say, we want the brain to be like a nice place to be, right? The inflammation's fine, everyone's talking and communicating okay. There's not like this neuroexcitotoxic model of like glutamate just flying around everywhere and stuff. So I think that's a nice brain. Let's put those cells in there. And that's when they notice things like, wow, Timmy really started talking after those stem cells. And we're like, yeah, right.
Cool.
Um, so we just kind of try to find that. And that's where the bioregulators, so the bioregulators talk to DNA. Exosomes are for cellular communication. Stem cells are new cells, but peptides are signaling molecules. So typically from one organ system to another. So those kind of work similar to the exosomes, but it's not quite. And you actually have to source bioregulators much like they source exosomes, either
Right.
ectopic.
Discuss a little more about bioregulators. People might not know much about that.
Yeah, so it's a string of peptides that just walk into the DNA of a cell, certain cell line, and they have it just start, it just finds homeostasis. Like, well, this switch is supposed to be on, this gene is supposed to be off, and it just starts flipping switches. Um, so like and they're not that expensive. It's like $150 for a bottle of
Okay.
60, which sounds like a lot, but when we're talking about good stuff, like I can give you way more expensive stuff than that.
Yeah.
Um, because these parents are about to go, well, we're about to do $9,000 of stem cells.
Mhm.
Fly across the country with this 4-year-old real sick. And I'm like, well, let's just maybe try a $150 bottle of pills first, right? If not, my bad, I'm not even making money. I told them to go buy it directly from the manufacturer. So, anyways, they do it and they message me and they're like, her speech exploded. She went from like dada to like, daddy, come pick me up. Play with me, daddy. Like she's like again, like it never happened. And I'm like, y'all still want to get stem cells? And they're like, nah, we're good. We're just going on a vacation with that money now. So I'm like, there we go, right?
Yeah.
So that's where, like, to me, I like Occam's razor. The simplest solution tends to be the right one. And if we're talking about all these genetic issues, and I think the whole premise of functional medicine was started by the guy that coined the term. He wanted to change epigenetic expression. He wanted to change how cells function. And I think we can do that with bioregulators. Now, they're a band-aid. They're not going to fix the environment. They're not going to decolonize the small intestine from aspergillus or something. But I say, but man, if I can keep a kid from having seizures while I'm trying to do that, why not? So then we usually kind of focus on a couple things like the immune trigger, balancing the immune system, helping the cells, and the cell line and the genes, but then also helping the receptor sites for the function, as well as giving the cell what it needs to be able to function. And that's where a lot of supplements are like drugs now. Everybody knows like magnesium works, but how do you get magnesium into the brain? It's a very difficult thing to do. Um, so that's where I find the same thing like, well, how do I actually get this stuff to somebody's kidneys? Like that's therein lies the rub. That gets really hard, harder than people might think. And I don't trust supplement companies. There's a reason I've only talked for Zymogen once, like stuff like that. They're like, wow, he's up there not really hawking our wares. He's talking about how Lactobacillus acidophilus has actually triggered lupus. And I'm like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to me, you got to kind of worry about that, right?
Yeah, for sure. And let's talk about autism again.
Yeah.
You work with a kid with autism. It's a brain disorder. There's
Mm-hmm.
immune dysfunction. You are skilled both at brain and immune. What has been your experience just really focusing on the immune system versus integrating also therapies for kids' brains to help their brain reconnect while you do it?
I'd say it has to be both, man. I mean, and I've seen it both ways. Like I've seen kids, the first autistic kid, I did no neuro exercise with him. He started developing two echolali, and we know that's kind of a step to speech, but I'm thinking like, wow. But that's when I thought if I knew functional neurology, I could really help this kid out. But by the same token, I've seen kids like stop the head tilt. They start pooping on a regular basis whenever we get their brain doing what it needs to do. And a lot of the times we'll even see that on stool testing. We're like, hey, the pancreas is failing. I'm like, your kid's 6. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like they're a raging alcoholic and we're like, well, what's going on?
Mhm.
Let's say their kid's brain can't control the pancreas. Like, If it can't control the eyes and like foot and stuff like that, I say, why would we assume it can control like complex organs too? That doesn't make sense. So I just find it's just easier from both. Like I work with Dr. Kyle a lot, and we just say it's like peanut butter and chocolate. Separate, we're pretty good, but together it's just even yummier, right? So that's where I just find like if I pair up with somebody that really knows the brain, because I'll give myself a C minus. I'm fully transparent. I've never passed the boards. People make fun of me for it. I say, I know enough to be dangerous. Like I can use some big words. I can definitely help people with like unilateral MS get alpha cane, and that's great. Um, but if you want me to like out big word you in the brain, I know you'll smoke me in it. And that's okay, right? We all have our strengths. But what I find is me clinically, unless I'm talking to like Dr. Voyajadani, not many people can teach me about the immune system. And I've run so many stool tests. I have PTSD. I think I need therapy. I talk about poop so much. So it's just kind of the rut that I'm in clinically. I just find that I pair well because we'll both say the same things, me and clinicians that know more about the brain, like, wow, I'm seeing the Parkinson's get better faster while I'm also addressing this metabolic stuff.
Cool.
Um,
And then mold, how long are you typically treating people for mold? I know it's different patient by patient, but do you have
yeah,
like a range? Like, let's say I get diagnosed with mold and you're talking to me, are you giving me like, hey, this is going to take X amount of time, or are you retesting it at all?
yeah.
How are you kind of going through
Retesting,
that?
yeah, like retesting is like minimum 6 months back to
Okay.
total body burden. It doesn't even start to day one until they get out of mold. So I might tell people like we're getting rid of mold toxins, but you're still breathing it in, so we can't really like have a valid like, kind of next phase. But fixing the gut, usually 3 or 4 months. I know the internet makes it seem like it's just a few weeks of probiotics and glutamine, and then it's fine. But like the cutoff for Candida is 30 in a urinary test. I had a kid with like 311. That's five. So I'm like, I told the mom, like, we're going to be killing this for probably 3 or 4 months. Like, this is a deep, like, thorough infection. It's everywhere in your kid's GI tract. And I
Are
know
you
it's elsewhere too.
are you
Huh?
rotating the antifungals? Or are you kind of sticking
Totally.
to, yeah.
Yeah, you have to. It's just like the medical model. We know they're going to learn and develop. Everything fights to survive, right? So that's where I usually follow up every month. And people are like, oh, I'm about to get another bottle of this. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, we got to do something different. Because, like an MMA fighter, if I put you in an arm bar in round one, I probably won't be able to get you in an arm bar in round two. You're going to be kind of expecting me to like flying triangle it or something, right?
Sure.
Um,
So
yeah.
why don't we
So,
talk about that? Because you mentioned
yeah.
quorum sensing, you mentioned biofilms. I had Lyme. People might not know that. So
Hmm.
I went into school 15 something years ago thinking I'd be a Lyme doctor and kind of thinking I'd do exactly what you're doing, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because so like and when I learned for myself, I'm selfish, right? A lot of
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
know back then was for me. And obviously I wanted to help people, but I had to help myself first. And I remember
Hmm.
reading probably, I don't know, 2006, 2007. And I remember reading about quorum sensing and biofilms and good pathogens and bad pathogens and how they kind
Yeah.
of can communicate. And so why don't you play that story to everyone about, because we know we have more microbes than human cells in our body. And we
Yeah.
know we've got a lot of different infections, both good and bad, that a lot of times we could deal with, like you said.
Yeah.
So how do these microbes communicate? How are they living in our body? How are they surviving? How are they evading? Right? You don't have to go
Yeah.
into Lyme and get that complicated, but just in
Yeah.
general, like tell people the story.
So I just say because if we talk about the gut, we'll just keep it easy. Gut quorum sensing. We're not talking about distal quorum sensing from like the gut to the cardiovascular system, which totally exists.
Mhm.
But let's say the gut's a neighborhood, right? Or we'll just say like it's when the Blue Jays just won, right? Didn't they win? Yeah, or whatever. I don't watch sports. Somebody
Neither
won
do I.
baseball. Was it
We both have
Dodgers?
kids. I
Yeah.
don't want sports. My TV
Yeah,
doesn't
no, I
turn
got
on
kids, right? I don't
unless I
got
got
time for
Blippi.
that crap.
Yeah.
But somebody just won a World Series, and I say, so everyone is having a good time. But then imagine if there was like gunfire. Now everyone's not having a good time. Everyone immediately, bam, changed their behavior based on the environment around them. That's exactly what bacteria do. So they talk a lot to each other. But to biofilm's point, like to that, what's on one side of the biofilm is not the same as the inside or the other side. If you want to gross yourself out, anyone listening, just go on YouTube and type in tartar removal. You're going to see a bunch of dentists start like working on homeless people that haven't been to a dentist in like 30 years. Some of them will even hold up giant chunks of plaque or biofilm, and you'll see lines in there like that one's green, that one's yellow, that one's blue, that one's black, that one's white, and we're like, there's a hierarchy in there. So breaking down biofilms like peeling an onion, you got to start sometimes getting deep. But you can't break it down forever. Everybody makes biofilm, even good bacteria. So how do we selectively choose? Glad you asked.
I was
Typically
about
a
to ask you, to be honest with you, so I'm glad you
yeah, I'll
brought that
say
up because that's my next question.
typically a pathogenic biofilm, it's all about charge, right? It's all about electrons. Like we know a pathogenic bacteria, for example, they'll fold their cell walls in, and now they start to have these kind of negative charges behind them, where it's easier for them to start like basically like hijacking our cells, like cell walls and stuff like that. So then I think, well, what if we start using positively charged things? Silver being one of them. So that has a tendency to kind of hone in on the bad stuff. But that's where I like soil-based organisms. And if you actually look, Lactobacillus and Bifidobacter, you're familiar with a lot of the reading, but there's one study called Probiotic Paradox. I
Okay.
love it. It talks about, well, how do these alive bacteria and different bacteria behave? And if you start looking at certain bifidobacter strains, they can increase like tumor necrosing factor alpha by like 100 folds, like a lot. Yeah. So we're like, but then it's context dependent. You sprinkle some LPS in there, they make even more. So we're like, well, are they making the TNF alpha to try to fight a dead bacteria? Because we know a dead bacteria is technically, even if it's a good guy, it's still a dead bacteria. So what doesn't happen in the gut is called the reseeding theory, meaning, oh, a woman is low in lactobacillus rhamnosus, so she has UTIs. So I give her lactobacillus rhamnosus, and magically it's high on her stool test next. We know they don't live down there, right? What happens is these cell walls are docking with immune cells or neuronal cells, and they can still talk to them, even though they're dead. They still have a cell wall, but then they slough off. Because what the Human Microbiome Project taught us was nothing actually lives down there from a probiotic standpoint. They started dying, like all these probiotics, and just had people take it and they'd like check for dye in the poop. After 30 days, there was no dye. None of that DNA got passed on like generationally from the bacteria. Um, so that's where I like the soil-based organisms. They know they're not going to live down there. They open up, they do quorum sensing, they start talking to Pyrus patches, they start chemotaxis, they start really coordinating the immune response. Like, hey, we found some candida over there. Like, we killed some, but you might want to check it out too. Um, and then typically the fibers that we eat. Everyone has their bias for a fiber or for a diet, and that's okay. But if I make the Seigler diet, the focus would be eat what's local and seasonally available, and that's it. That's the way our ancestors ate. Like back to the radishes. I hate radishes. Once I learned that radishes could get rid of some mold toxins in my body better than other stuff, I mean radishes like it's going out of style, man. So we know that getting rid of the bad guys is a big part of the quorum sensing. But what we eat dictates who gets fed, how they behave, all that stuff changes based on diet.
Well, let me ask you
Oh
this
yeah.
because I think this is going to be right up your alley. Um, Obviously, there's been a big communication over the last decade or so on the gut microbiome,
Mhm.
right? And obviously, there's a second brain in the gut, and it's the bacteria, it's SIBO, it's everything's the gut right now, and
Yeah,
for good
yeah.
cause, maybe, right? Tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about the brain microbiome and what you've read about the brain microbiome, because you're obviously
Yeah.
nebulizing a lot of things and you're trying to get into the brain. And I would
Yeah.
argue the brain microbiome might have some correlation.
Yeah, it does and it's not sterile like we've been taught to believe. Nothing truly is, but
Mhm.
like that's where back to me almost having a retropharyngeal abscess. I'm like, man, I'm worried about getting that getting in my brain, dude. Like that'll kill me. Um, so there are certain things that we want to keep out. Um, but to me, it's more of, at least my reading is showing it's more of like the signaling. Like the brain is sensing all of these things, like especially the vagus nerve. We all talk about it for constipation. We know after a dude gets his head hit, like of course he's constipated, right? But we all know sensories, like it's main or the vagus is mainly sensory. So it's this big feedback. I say the brain's just a sponge using all these organs, trying to find as much information it can about the environment to dictate how am I going to respond to this environment. And a lot of that signaling is bacterial. We know there's a lung brain axis. We know there's a gut brain axis. We know there's a nose brain axis. Girls' parts, I mean, UTIs, we know how bad that can affect the nervous system, right? Grandma's in nursing home. She takes a steep nosedive. First thing they're doing is looking for a UTI, right? So we know we can see these kind of peripheral things activating the immune system centrally, where now all these cytokines are just going. Yeah, there's going to be chemotaxis, and she's going to try to get rid of that urinary tract infection, but we see the effects those microbes have on the brain. We know there's a mouth-heart microbiome too, like orthodontal work. Oh my gosh, like they're like, hey, we're finding Porphyromonas gingivalis in your heart, and we're like, yeah, funny how that works, right?
Mhm.
Um, and to that point, we don't know what we don't know. Like I've even told some people that are much smarter than me, like I think our thought process is wrong. I don't know what's right, but I don't know if we have it 100% yet, like how the immune system and the brain really do things yet. Um, kind of like a virus. Like I don't personally believe viruses exist. Like they've never isolated one, they've never seen one on a microscope. So I know there's COVID-19, but I say I don't know if I don't think it's a virus. I don't think our concept of a virus is correct. I think we're wrong, but I don't know what's right. Like I'm not smart enough to come up with the solution, but I start to read enough research. I'm like, they've never actually isolated a virus and exposed that to a. You can like start actually looking at AI for this stuff. Like
So
there's never been a.
you've been down that rabbit hole of what is a virus.
Yeah, Cox postulate has not been met for a virus, man, and that really bugs me. So, like, it keeps me up at night. I'm like, it's never been met. But that's where I'd say, but I don't know what's right because I can see on testing this specific antibody for this virus. So I'd say, I don't know if it's a virus, but there's something there, and the immune system is responding. I can't deny that. Um, but I think it's like explaining taxes to an ant. I don't think we're smart enough yet to really comprehend exactly how all this works. And that's okay. You've probably figured out there's no Dunning-Kruger effect. Like someone was like, "Oh, imposter syndrome is totally normal," and I'm like, "For 10 years though, like at what point do I finally feel confident in doing this?"
That's funny.
um, yeah, but I mean, I don't know, man. I wish I could come up with a better answer, but
I think
like,
that's gonna, I don't think anyone knows, right? I think that's going to be the next frontier because again, my
yeah,
background's in Lyme and then all the controversy over what are these plaques in the brain? Is it the
yeah,
immune system isolating infections? Is it just build up in
yeah.
protein, right? And there's different controversies. And like you said,
Yeah,
I always tell patients there's way more we don't know than we know. But what
yeah,
I do know is if we continue to do the same thing, we're all going
yeah,
to continue to get sicker. Because that I
yeah.
do know, right?
Like
'Cause the way we're
I
going is
was,
getting sicker.
yeah, to the point of the proteins misfolding. Like we know that the protein misfolding for alpha-synuclein for Parkinson's happens in the nose before it happens in the brain. But I was just reading, they found beta amyloid plaques misfolding in the gut before because they kept it for like several years, and then like 6 or 7 years later, they're like, now we're gonna check this out inside people's brains. And they were like, we found the protein misfolding before they actually started to develop neurodegeneration. And I think, interesting.
Have you read the
Um,
research on vagus nerve sections and them cutting the vagus nerve in Parkinson's?
yeah, it actually helps, right?
Yeah,
So I
yeah, for
actually don't
sure.
do and this is where people will throw stones at me all day long. If I see a dude with full-blown Parkinson's, I'm not doing motor vagal nerve stuff.
Me
Like
neither.
I'm just staying away from that, and I'm like, you know what? I'll fix the constipation some other way. Um, but yeah, I'm glad you read that because I think, man, we're just retrograding proteins, and I'm like, and the more motor I drive in that nerve, the more it's just gonna walk up into like, vagal like, dorsimotor complex, and then we're just gonna have like even more trouble there.
Sure. So let's
So
finish
I'm
on
glad
this
you're in the
because
same thought.
yeah, man, we're on the same page with a lot of things. That's why
Yeah,
for the record, this is the first time I think we're talking in person. We've talked a few
yeah,
online, so I was looking forward to this because I think we might come from different angles at some point, but we're kind of, I think, on the same page more than we might think. Uh,
Yeah.
so let me finish with this. Favorite book and favorite movie?
Oh, non-nerd related, I would
You could be nerd
say.
related. You could do whatever you want.
Yeah, well, favorite book. You know, I hate to say it, Lord of the Flies.
Okay.
I'm always a fan of that. I
You could
had to read it
identify.
3 years in a row for high school. Had the same
Okay.
English teacher. It was supposed to be random, but I drew it out of the hat of like again. So I had to have a different, like, I had to have a different essay each time. Couldn't
Okay.
just, here's the one from last year. So I actually learned to like it. A lot of the symbolism and, a lot of things like that. Uh, Favorite movie, I'll say, I don't know. I kind of like comedy. It depends on what I'm in the mood for. I am actually kind of a movie buff, but I'm a huge Star Wars fan, man.
Okay.
Old school. So I
Okay.
would I would
Like the
say
old Star Wars,
maybe
not the new ones, but the old ones.
no, the new one that was good was what's the one where they like blew up at the end? Rogue One. I
Okay.
thought that one was good because they all died at the end, right? Like I'm not spoiler and alert in it, but I'm like that was kind of a heroic thing to do. Like you're
Yeah.
screwed, but you're still doing it. Um, but honestly, I'm kind of a bad guy at heart. I'd say Empire Strikes Back, man.
Okay. You're
Like
going old
find out
school.
Luke, like finds out Darth Vader's his dad. Like all this bad stuff's happening, and I'm like, oh man, Empire, bro.
Nice. Let
So
me ask you this. If you were
yeah,
not in healthcare, what do you think you'd be doing with your life?
Marsoc probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to be a tough guy. I was in the military in the army and I made it to SFAS, which is like the school before you have to go to like true special forces. They're like, before we waste all this money on you, are you gonna wash out like day one? So I passed that and I was like, that was tough. But then I met my girlfriend, wife at the time, and not to get too personal, I have a lot of friends that left behind wives and kids
Without a
from
doubt.
the military, and I thought, I can't do that. And the more I wanted to try to become a tough guy, the more I learned I don't really want to be a tough guy, man. Like I'll leave that for the actual tough guys.
Yeah.
Um, but it was, for lack of a better term, that dopamine surge. Like not a lot of things would start to compete with action, right? You're like, yeah, jumping out of helicopters, that is fun, man. I can see myself doing this all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but then, I mean, maybe not now, but I was thinking like guaranteed a job, like, work for the Army or the Marines. Like, can't be too bad. You kind of guaranteed a job. But I got my vitiligo from anthrax shots
I
for
didn't want
getting
to mention it,
mobilized.
but I've obviously, as you have worked with special forces, right? And you work with special forces, you can appreciate the special things they're put through, right?
Yeah.
And special is not always good. And
Yeah.
let alone the shots or hanging out in ponds for weeks for who knows where. And
Yeah.
the
Dude, but their
exposure these people
families,
get is
man,
crazy.
they're
It's really
like,
sad.
their wives would tell me like he's going to be gone for half a year. I don't even know where he's going to go. Anytime the phone rings, anytime the doorbell rings, like, is this his officer? Is somebody coming by to tell me my husband's dead? And I would see those things. I'm like, there's just no way, man. Like if
Yeah.
I, you know,
So you
because
want the adrenaline though. You like the adrenaline.
yeah, everything for me was always faster, stronger, louder. But now that I have kids, I'm just mellowed. He's actually yelling at me like, "Dad, come on, eat dinner." Um,
That's
but now I've
funny.
mellowed out and I just surge my dopamine by trying to reach clinical goals and just being present with my kids. Like you're a dad now too. Get off the
Yeah,
phone, just be in there, man. It's so good for my soul.
I get it, man. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. And so let's get to
Yeah.
that last question so we both get back to our kids.
Yeah.
If you had to have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who are you having dinner with and what are you talking about?
Mm. You know what? I'd like to see my friend Steven. He died when we were 19.
Okay.
Just talk to him about stuff, man. Show him pictures of the wife and kids. Just pick up life. He was my best friend. He was my battle buddy.
Okay.
So that was to me is like a big hole in my heart. Because I think, I died for nothing. That was like one of my first major losses. Like, some distant family members had died, but he was like a true, like my best friend. And he's actually been, now that I think about it, he's been dead longer than he was even alive.
Isn't that
So
crazy when that happens?
it is, man. But just chit chat with them, not even talk about anything crazy. Just, just talk again. That would probably be good enough for me. So,
Amazing. Well, on that
yeah.
note, I really appreciate your time and your generosity with the information.
Yeah, I
I had a
appreciate it,
great time
man.
talking to you, man. And then hopefully everyone watching this got a lot out of it because you said a lot of really important and informative things. So I really appreciate it.
Very cool. Thanks for having me, Dr. Traster.
Have a good time with your family.
Well, too. You too, brother. Bye.
Bye.